Alright, so this is either the worst case of mistaken identity or this man was really Ivan the Terrible. Welcome back, guys. I just watched the documentary The Devil Next Door. It is a 5-part docuseries that's out on Netflix right now, and it's based on the case of John Demjanjuk. However you say that, let's call him John. This is basically the trial of his life because he is accused of being Ivan the Terrible, who is a guard from the Holocaust who used to put Jews into the gas chamber, torture and kill them as well. So let's first talk about the documentary itself, and then later on I'll give you my thoughts whether I think he did it or he did not, because there's a lot of information in this documentary itself. And I definitely enjoyed this documentary. Like right away I will tell you guys, like, definitely go watch it before you make your own opinions if you guys have heard the story, because this documentary has a lot of good people that they interview, because you have both people on both sides saying that he's innocent and other people saying that, yeah, this is the guy that was Ivan the Terrible. This is the guy that was at Treblinka torturing all these Jews during the Holocaust. The documentary itself shows us a lot of the courtroom drama, a lot of like footage from the Holocaust itself. It doesn't shy away from anything. There's a lot of imagery of like dead bodies like piled up. It's not too gory in the imagery, but it's actually gory in detail. We have testimonies from the witnesses themselves. There's 3 in particular that survived, and they point out that this is the man that was torturing them and putting some of their family members into the gas chambers. They mention how he used to like stab, cut them up, like take off ears, noses, cut the breast off of women, and then eventually throw them into the gas chambers so they can be exterminated, like if they were bugs. The details themselves are very, very graphic, and like I said, the documentary doesn't shy away from showing some of the imagery, basically showing piles of bodies on top of each other. If it was like dirty laundry, like that's the best way I can explain it. It's very graphic, and it's something that I think not a lot of people would be able to stomach. This documentary definitely made me more aware about the Holocaust, and it's not that I didn't know about the Holocaust before I watched this, but I knew what it was. I just never myself read into it, or I never like read more information than I should. Like I ended up reading more about victims, survival stories, what led to the Holocaust, more on Hitler, more on the war. So this documentary opened up my eyes a whole lot on the war and what led up to these events and after the events. So in a way, I'm kind of glad for this. It's a gut-wrenching documentary itself, but it opened up my eyes to other things and other things I could read up on. But let's go back to the documentary itself, because it is based on John Demjanjuk, or however you say his last name. And from the start, you can kind of see that things are kind of sketchy, because it's either going from defense attorneys getting sidelined or getting thrown off the team to documents being torn up by the OSI, and that makes a lot of the things very questionable. But John, a nationalized Ukrainian immigrant, has been working for Ford for about 30 years in Cleveland, Ohio, and that's until he gets arrested for being a war criminal. The OSI, or the U.S. Office of Special Investigations, gathered information that tied to him being Ivan the Terrible. And at a first glance, when you look at him, he just looks like this big, heavy-set guy. There's nothing really scary about him, and honestly, that's the first reaction I got from him when I first saw the documentary, and I was like, this guy does not look terrifying at all. But one thing that stuck with me was something that the supervisor said from the Ford factory, saying that a lot of these guys are from Ukraine, and a lot of them just went in, worked, did their thing. He never had an incident, it was never angry. But then again, he mentions that you never know, he could have been a sociopath, so we would have never known this guy's true identity or true life. John does a lot of weird things throughout this documentary, at least from what we are shown. Like for example, when he gets extradited to Israel, one of the things he requests for it right after he gets off the plane going down the stairs is if he can kiss the ground. And I get it, I guess, because it's Israel, but the weird thing is why would you want to do that when you're in custody and you have the TVs and cameras and all the news focused on you? Also, something that he does in the courtroom is he extends his hand to one of the witnesses that is testifying against him. That's something nobody should ever do. And 2 things that he doesn't deny is being a Sobibor, which is another concentration camp, and he also admits that he used to have a tattoo of his blood type under his arm. Interestingly enough, is something that guards from the concentration camps would have to identify their blood type. Only guards or the Nazis had that tattoo, but then later says that he removed the tattoo because he didn't realize that that's something that the guards did, which I'll get into this later, but I call BS. What makes this docuseries very compelling, and also obviously the case, is the testimony by these 3 witnesses. Now obviously they're very old. This is 1988. They're all giving their testimony, what they saw, that they saw this man putting people into gas chambers, torturing people basically, and they're all very graphic. I mean, every single one of them, and I feel bad for every single one of these men, but at the same time, I like facts. I like to have evidence, and of course, when this goes back all the way to the Holocaust, it's very hard to have any like evidence from back then except from eyewitnesses. And in this case, we have 3 old men, which later we get the defense attorney poking holes into their testimony, which sucks because they're very heart-wrenching stories and you kind of believe it. There's this one particular line from the story where this man tells him about how a little girl rose up from the chamber, comes out and just says that I want my mommy, and that really hit hard for me. Like, I was on the point of tears, and what's worse is that, you know, somebody came up to her, shot her, and then just threw her onto the pile of dead bodies. And I mean, details like that was just like graphic because those are real stories from these men, you know. Rosenberg's testimony itself was probably the most heartfelt one because he was like determined in himself and trying to prove to the judge and the entire courtroom that this is the man that committed those crimes. This is Ivan the Terrible at Treblinka. And he even goes so far to ask the judge, like, hey, can I please go up to him and look at him in the eye? Ask for permission from the judge to have John take off his glasses so he can stare at him. And this is where the whole incident where he extends his arm to greet him pisses off Rosenberg even more, and Rosenberg's like even more determined that yeah, this is the guy. And aside from the testimonies themselves, there's this whole ID card that was the very first part of the evidence that was tying him to Ivan, and that's the ID card of him as a soldier, a picture of him detailing the date of birth, his name being John Demjanjuk, and I also put him as Sobibor. Now I'm not going to talk about all the prosecution and the defense, but there's one person that I do want to talk about, and that is his defense attorney. And I'm not mentioning this certain part of him yet, but he is probably like the most douchebaggiest person that I've seen. Like, I mean, he's just full of himself and he just wants to do anything to win. And on top of that, let me remind you that the defense attorney is defending somebody accused of being a Nazi guard, putting people in gas chambers. And this defense attorney on top of that is a Jewish person, and it's insane that he's doing this. And I mean, throughout the whole documentary, he's just full of himself. But in a way, I kind of like that character, but at the same time, I hate it. It doesn't make sense. Yoram Shefto actually pokes a lot of holes in the prosecution's witness because he knows that these people are old, so he kind of helps create questions where they won't remember details. And they also find a letter from Rosenberg himself, who testified saying that this is the guy that killed all those people. Finds a letter saying that Rosenberg and a couple other Jew prisoners rose up and killed Ivan the Terrible himself. So that right there was very questionable, and Rosenberg just says that like that was an idea that he had. Eventually, John gets convicted of his crimes in 1988, and he is sentenced to death. He is sentenced to hang, and the whole time he keeps, you know, his innocence. And it's not until, of course, Shefto, his defense attorney, finds more information. And in a way, I feel like he was able to get information from the KGB, getting this insane document saying that, yeah, you have the wrong Ivan. And we find out that Ivan Marchenko is probably the person that they were talking about in the gas chambers, which looks nothing like John. Like, I mean, not even one bit of a resemblance. The pictures are so different. Ivan is more skinnier, shorter, and John is humongous compared to this guy. There were about 37 testimonies from guards at Treblinka putting Ivan Marchenko at that location. So once this was brought up for the appeals, unfortunately for the prosecution, they had no witnesses to put John back at Treblinka. So in that case, after all the evidence was reviewed with, you know, Ivan Marchenko being there, they had to let him go, and he was able to come back to the United States to live again. But the OSI did not give up, and they sued for his citizenship to be revoked and actually be sent to Germany for a new trial. He ended up getting deported again in 2009, and the main reason was because they were trying to get him for being at Sobibor the entire time. Now what's crazy is that, you know, he gets sent to Germany and they actually find them guilty of being at Sobibor. The whole time I believe they had the wrong person, so they at least had proof, you know, from John himself saying that yeah, he was at Sobibor. And why would you be there? You know, there's no other reason for you to be there unless you were either a guard or you were one of the Jew prisoners there. So he was a guard, but he kept proclaiming, saying that, you know, he was captured by the Nazis and he was forced to work at these camps. So of course they put him away. He was actually 91 when he went to jail. He went to prison for 5 years, but ended up dying 1 year into his sentence because he was 91 and he was suffering from from some illness. I mean, it was a little bit weird seeing this guy rolled up to the prosecution into the court, because I mean, he would go in a stretcher. I mean, that was, to me, that was a little absurd, but hey, you commit the crime, you gotta pay the time either way. So he ended up dying in 2012. So the question remains, was he really Ivan the Terrible? And honestly, I don't think he was. I do believe that they had the wrong person. And also, there's that whole thing with the OSI destroying documents, saying that maybe this guy was not the guy. I mean, the family members find a bunch of documents being thrown into trash, and the own family members put pieces here and there together, saying that maybe you got the wrong guy. And I think that we're trying to cover up their tracks. And I know I'm going into conspiracy theories here, but I do think that when they lined up his name to be Ivan the Terrible, they were just pulling straws, and they were like, you know what, we found our guy, let's just get him out of here and see what we can do. I think once they realized they had the wrong guy, they deleted or they erased all those files, and that's why they ended up getting rid of him. So that was a huge red flag for me. But the fact that John does not shy away from answering questions of him being a Sobibor, also that tattoo on his arm and that whole ID card, I don't think the KGB would forge that. I mean, even though they do say that the KGB is known for forging documents, I don't know how authentic that was. But the fact that he doesn't shy away from saying, no, I wasn't a Sobibor, there are a lot of questions that he doesn't say no to, so that kind of leaves it up in the air. So I do think that he was a guard at the prisons. I just don't think he was Ivan the Terrible. So I feel like he did participate in some way or another in the concentration camps, which obviously makes him a war criminal. So in the end, is he Ivan the Terrible? No. So my question is to you guys now, like, what do you guys think? Do you guys think that he was Ivan the Terrible after you guys watched the documentary? Did you guys do any more research? But if you guys are new to my channel, make sure you guys subscribe, hit the bell button, share this video with a friend, also let them know about the documentary. And as always, guys, stay tuned.